Hello, and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. I would like to thank all of our listeners who allow this program to continue providing the latest news through our exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and reputable sources from around the world. If you would like to stay up to date with our program, you can view or download all of our broadcasts online at youtube.com/VOR radio, or you can join our Facebook page to find more information on past and future programs. It is August 17th, 2014. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. The Islamic Society of North America is holding its 51st annual convention at the Cobo Center in Detroit, Michigan, August 29th through September 1st. Along with speakers, art, and entertainment representing Islamic culture in the United States, the convention is holding over an hour-long session concerning Rohingya, titled Rohingya Muslims and Islam in Myanmar, a population and a faith under threat of extermination. The session will include insight and testimonies from various speakers, including the ambassador for the permanent mission of OIC at United Nations, Mr. Go Chin, who, along with serving as political advisor to the OIC Secretary General from 2005 to 2010 at the OIC headquarters in Jeddah, promotes the OIC's interactions with UN agencies and civil society in raising awareness and forging partnerships in areas of religious peacemaking and promoting of tolerance and respect. Dr. T. Kumar, the International Advocacy Director for Amnesty International USA and former political prisoners for over 5 years in Sri Lanka, will also be speaking at the event. He has served as a human rights monitor in several countries around the world and as director of several refugee ships and refugee camps. Dr. Abdul Malik Mujahid, chairman of the Burma Task Force USA, a coalition of 19 major American organizations united to stop genocide in Burma, will also be present. Dr. Mujahid was thrice selected as one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world in 2011, 2012, and 2014, and has authored more than 400 articles on Islamic living and public policy. Former guest on our show, the Honorable Tom Andrews, is also speaking at the session. Listeners of the program will remember that Mr. Andrews is President and Chief Executive Officer of United to End Genocide, and along with serving as National Director of Win Without War, has worked closely with the National Coalition Government of the Union of Burma, facilitated the creation of the European Burma Network, and served as General Secretary of the Nobel Peace Laureate Campaign for Aung San Suu Kyi. Also providing insight on the situation in Myanmar is the Director General of the Arakan Rohingya Union, Chairman and founder of the Burmese Rohingya Association of North America, and friend of the program, Professor Dr. Waqar Uddin. Dr. Uddin leads the ARU in seeking a political solution to the issues faced by the Rohingya ethnic minority in Myanmar, to reclaim their citizenship that guarantees their political and human rights, to foster relations between Rohingya and fellow ethnic groups of Myanmar, and to advance the Rohingya people through improvement of social, economical, cultural, and educational infrastructures. The 51st ISNA convention will also include a film festival, art exhibits, a bazaar, and hundreds of speakers, including a special appearance by the former United States President Jimmy Carter. The Irrawaddy reported on Wednesday that according to an official from the country's Central Census Commission, Burma's total population is likely to be less than the widely accepted estimate of 60 million people. The preliminary results of the first census conducted in Burma in more than 3 decades are due to be announced at a press conference by the end of this month, said the Secretary of the Central Census Commission. One reason for the overestimate could be the lack of a credible population tally in more than 30 years, he admitted. A spokesperson for the UN Population Fund, which helped administer the census, declined to comment on whether Burma's census results would confirm the Secretary's assertions, saying via email only that the provisional results will include the population count. This year's census was marred by controversy after provisions on its questionnaire asked respondents to identify their ethnicity and religion, exposing deep-seated tensions in the multi-ethnic nation. Many Rohingya Muslims in Arakan State were not counted, the number excluded unknown but likely to be in the hundreds of thousands because they refused to self-identify by the government's preferred term for the group, Bengali. Separately, in northern Kachin State, areas controlled by the Kachin Independence Army were not counted after the government failed to secure an agreement with the ethnic rebel group to allow census enumerators access. Burma's last census was conducted more than 30 years ago in 1983. The 12-day nationwide census was conducted this year beginning on March 30th. Preliminary findings from a manual count of the census forms will be released in August and will include at least population and gender data down to the divisional and township levels. The U.S. is telling Myanmar companies it once designated as cronies of Myanmar's former military junta now may be the time to get off the American blacklist, according to the Wall Street Journal's article Friday. The effort highlights just how much of Myanmar's economy remains under sanctions and the challenge for companies seeking to wade into the new terrain. State Department officials met with blacklisted businessmen in Rangoon at the end of June to encourage them to apply to have their names cleared if they were prepared to show their commitment to Myanmar's democratic transition, officials said. To be granted the delisting, companies would need to demonstrate that they are taking steps to sever their ties to Myanmar's military and prove they are not committing human rights abuses. But despite the sanctions easing, many of the potential partners in the country remain on the U.S. black list, known as Specially Designated Nationals, making any deals a huge compliance challenge. There are currently around 120 Myanmar companies and individuals on the blacklist, according to the U.S. Treasury records. The U.S. Treasury Department blacklists Myanmar companies because of alleged ties to the generals who ruled the country until 2011, when a civilian government was established. But decades of military rule mean much of the economy is still controlled by companies with deep military ties, experts say. Most of the big economic players in the country are still designated, said Eric Ferrari, an attorney who specializes in sanctions. That issue was demonstrated in a visit to Myanmar by Secretary of State John Kerry last week, where he stayed at the Lake Garden Hotel, Nay Pieta, owned by sanctioned tycoon U Za Za and constructed by U Za Za's company, Max Myanmar, which also appears on the U.S. sanctions list, according to the Myanmar Times. The spokesperson said that the U.S. delegation was assigned the hotel by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and asked for the hotel to be changed when they became aware of the issue, but other accommodations could not be arranged. We recognize the late owner of the hotel assigned to us was on the list, but less problematic alternative hotels that also met our safety and security standards were not available, the spokesperson told the Myanmar Times on August 13th. Mr. Kerry, who was in Myanmar for a round of ASEAN meetings, did not violate any U.S. sanctions with his stay. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which details regulations for dealing with SDN-listed individuals and entities, includes an exemption for activities related to travel, including hotel accommodations, which applies to the U.S. delegation's use of the Lake Garden Hotel. Myanmar companies that do apply for delisting from the U.S. Department of Treasury will likely have to wait for years, said Mr. Ferrari, who represents firms seeking to get off the blacklist. And for companies probing business deals in Myanmar, it's unclear whether the current easing of sanctions will last. The U.S. is already coming under criticism from human rights groups and some lawmakers who allege that Myanmar's military continues to commit atrocities and is blocking opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi from running for presidency. The SDN list is being used as an undeserved carrot for Myanmar's military and its cronies on the SDN list, said Simon Billenness, interim executive director of U.S. Campaign for Burma. Most companies and persons that appear on the SDN list are alleged to have profited from close relationships with the previous military junta. Entities and individuals that are SDN listed are barred from engaging in business with U.S. companies, and their assets are frozen in the U.S. A number of Myanmar's largest and best-known firms are on the list. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Tom Malinowski met with individuals who are on the SDN list during his visit to Myanmar in June. He said that many appeared very eager to take steps to have themselves and their companies removed from the list. You are listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit organization coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. I am your host, Zach Taylor. University World News wrote on Friday about the ongoing government-imposed ban on Rohingya trying to attend college in Sittwe after the anti-Muslim violence there 2 years ago, citing an Al Jazeera report. Authorities banned hundreds of Rohingya from returning to university as part of a system of racial segregation imposed in the name of keeping peace. Today, members of the Muslim minority group cannot set foot on the campus of Sittwe University, and a handful of armed police near the university's main entrance, along with a civilian guard at the gate, make sure no one breaks that rule. The government-owned university, the only one in Rakhine State, sits in the Rohingya area, which is now considered by many as a de facto open-air prison for hundreds of thousands of the ethnic minority group. The barring of Rohingya students from the university comes from the government, with officials justifying the policy as a way to prevent violence. They claim that if the two religions mix, then clashes could erupt. In other news, Mark Farmaner, director of Burma Campaign UK and contributor to Huffington Post, wrote a scathing article concerning the British government's dismissal of ethnic cleansing in Myanmar as bumps in the road. He writes that 4 years after its reform process began, Burma still has one of the worst human rights records in the world. In fact, human rights violations which break international law have actually increased, with evidence of war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and even precursors of genocide all happening under President Thein Sein's rule. These violations don't fit easily into the transition to democracy narrative which the British government is trying to present about Burma. So when Foreign Officer Minister Hugo Swire, MP, is confronted with the inconsistency of claims of reform and ongoing human rights violations on the ground, he faces a problem. The solution British diplomats and diplomats in the USA and the rest of Europe seem to have agreed upon is to dismiss these abuses. What they are effectively saying is that as long as government-led reforms continue, they won't allow what is happening to the Rohingya to influence their policy of building closer relations with the Burmese government. Think about how the Burmese government will interpret this message, he asks. It is literally handing them a get-out-of-jail-free card to do what they like regarding the Rohingya. And as we have seen since 2012, they are playing that card at every opportunity, he writes. Even before the reform process began, the international community was united in the opinion that the situation of the Rohingya was unacceptable. They were stateless and suffered the most severe repression of any ethnic group in Burma. The director continues that these violations of international law cannot simply be dismissed as bumps in the road. Ethnic cleansing isn't just a bump, as Hugo Swire MP calls it. The forced displacement of 140,000 Rohingya isn't just a bump. Restrictions on humanitarian aid to displaced Rohingya resulting in immense suffering and death are not just a bump. This continuing downward spiral on humanitarian issues has not prompted Hugo Swire to rethink Burma policy. The focus on promoting trade remains his priority. Unconditional training of the Burmese army will continue. In its defense, the British government claims that it does raise these issues with the Burmese government, which is true. But President Thein Sein and his ministers are excellent tacticians. They have been outmaneuvering the international community for decades. They are fully aware of where the British government's priorities lie, and it isn't to stop violations of international law against the Rohingya. They know the same applies to the rest of the EU, the USA, and Australia. Farmaner writes that none are willing to change their policy of partnership with the Burmese government for the sake of this Muslim minority. So the Burmese government will continue its policy of repression against the Rohingya, trying to make the situation for them so unbearable that they will leave the country. Human rights violations will continue. The growing apartheid will become entrenched. Thousands more Rohingya will drown trying to flee Burma. More Rohingya children will die because of restrictions on humanitarian aid. The article concludes that for Hugo Swire, those dead children are merely inevitable bumps in the road. The overall direction of travel is good. British companies are winning electricity contracts with the Burmese government, and there is no need for a rethink on policy. The international medical group MSF has urged the Myanmar government to follow through on a commitment to let it resume work in one of the poorest parts of the country, warning that healthcare there has seriously deteriorated since it was expelled. The government ordered the group out of Rakhine State in February after the group said it had treated people it believed were victims of sectarian violence. The government denied that an attack had taken place, and it has also accused MSF of being biased in favor of members of the minority Muslim community. The withdrawal of the agency, which had operated in the area for more than 20 years, left some 500,000 Rohingya Muslims without access to reliable medical care. What has become clear since the expulsion is that the situation has gotten more grievous by the day, said the operational advisor to MSF Holland on Myanmar. The government announced on July 23rd that MSF would be allowed to return to Rakhine State. However, MSF says that it has no official word from the government since the announcement was made. The advisor said the decision to allow MSF to resume work had not been translated into how and when they can return to Rakhine and conduct their medical activities. Than Tun, a Buddhist leader and member of an emergency coordination committee set up in March to monitor the work of international aid groups, said the decision was not supported by the people of Rakhine State. Some aid workers say the announcement that MSF would be allowed to resume its work had more to do with politics than resolving the humanitarian crisis. The announcement came as Yang Hee Lee, the new UN human rights envoy to Myanmar, visited the country, including the Rakhine area. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry attended a regional conference in the capital, Nay Pyi Taw, recently. On July 26, the head of the president's office posted a photo on his social media feeds showing a previous protest against MSF and warned that people in Rakhine State were organizing to strike against the regional government for inviting MSF to return. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a weekly news program bringing you up-to-date information about the Rohingya people in Myanmar. You can catch our broadcasts every Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time here in the United States at youtube.com/VOR Radio, or you can join our page on Facebook to find more information on the program. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.